Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Founder Stories. Today we have the absolute honor to host our dear friend Bruce. Bruce is a phenomenal person, someone I'm very excited to call a friend and learn from him constantly on all the interactions that I have with him. But Bruce is the managing director of a phenomenal fund called Blumberg Capital. They're operating and now out of their fifth fund, have invested in some credible companies, which we're going to talk about. But what I am very excited about is to personally learn about Bruce, his values, who he is on a personal level, how he becomes better on a daily basis, so we can apply these lessons into our own life. So Bruce, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, I'm very excited. This is, took a bit of time, sometime in the making, asked you question time, and we're finally here. And
yes.
Very excited to welcome you on your first podcast.
Thank you very much.
So to start off this conversation, to frame it, I mean, there's many topics. We've had an incredible interaction right before this podcast we got into. We spoke about everything, almost like a podcast and stuff. But
a podcast within a podcast.
Exactly. But first off, I want to, our initial podcast we were supposed to record a little month back, and we heard the unfortunate news that your father passed, and we had to reschedule. Yeah. So first of all, I want to express my condolences.
Thank you.
But your father was a very special man. I've heard stories from you. I want to know, what are some of the things that you personally learned from your father and that has shaped you now as an adult, things that you picked up from in your childhood from him that take you throughout in your personal life and your business life?
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for your condolences. Sorry that we had to reschedule. Life will always bring things that are unexpected, obviously, and I think my dad is very blessed. He was with my mom for almost 75 years and lived to almost 92. I'm the youngest of four sons, of four boys, and he has a legacy of 16 grandchildren and approaching 30 great-grandchildren and more on the way. So, he had a wonderful life, and I feel lucky to have, been his son and to go through it. For me, and it's fresh, obviously, with my dad having passed, just a little bit over a month ago. I think one of my brothers said it best at the funeral, where my dad always said, if you're going to do something, do it right. And I think he instilled that sort of core value into each of us, that anything worth doing is worth doing right. And so, number one, we've always had that philosophy and that approach with pretty much everything we've done in life. Right. And number two, really seeing from my dad, my mom, and my brothers, who are also amazing role models and incredibly accomplished. It's just, nothing comes easy. Everything, you've got to work hard. It takes time. And life is about showing up, and hopefully good things will happen if you do that. So those are probably two of the main core things I would say that my dad transmitted to us. And we grew up in a very structured, pretty rigid, religious environment, and we all aspired. And my parents were role models in that regard. Not only was my dad a professional, he was a dentist, but, my mom was an entrepreneur as well. And, we lived that and saw that. And I think it really impacted and, is driven deeply into the DNA of myself and my siblings.
Right, wow. The question that's coming up in my mind now is, how are you doing with grief and everything?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's the natural progression of life, and we're blessed that, my dad lived to almost 92. So and there's been so much tragedy. We just went to a 10/7 memorial the other night, and it's been a year. So, and my wife, Michelle, and I were in Israel last year on 10/7, and there's been so much tragedy that, my dad passing at almost 92 is not tragedy, but, It's interesting you're asking it because it still stung a lot. I know for me and my brothers, as weird as it was that for the last 2 years he had some dementia, he wasn't doing great. It still surprised us nonetheless, and it's still painful, and it stings to lose a mom or dad. Yeah. I feel really blessed that my mom's almost 90 and she's doing, thank God, great, and that my dad was around for this long. My wife's dad, my father-in-law, passed away almost 30 years ago. And so to me, that's a bit tragic to, have lived and worked so hard for decades and not to really maybe see some of your children married, to see grandchildren, great-grandchildren. That's, more on the scale of tragedy. And there's obviously a lot of tragedy going on in the world. So it's hard. And, I find myself thinking and being reminded of things about my dad and trying to focus on the positive and the good. And thankfully, there was a lot of good. There was a lot of positive. And, thankfully, my brothers and I and our extended family are like supporting my mom and, there for her sort of physically and emotionally to help out when it's hard. And it's, you kind of live life forwards and you understand it backwards. And so until you've experienced it, and I remember saying to my wife that day, it's the first time I felt old. I never really felt old before. And, it definitely ages you and it puts a lot of things in perspective. Again, getting to, I know you want to touch on, values and the meaning of life to the extent there's any wisdom here on that and insight. But, you kind of realize like carpe diem, you got to seize the moment, and it's really important to spend time with your family and with your loved ones. We had 9/11 in America, we had 10/7, in Israel. And so now more than ever, I think that's really important to take time to appreciate and cherish the people that we love. By the way, I found it as a tremendous blessing. My dad passed a little bit over a month ago, but he was pretty sick. And one of my brothers actually called me like a few weeks before that. So I actually, like maybe 2 weeks before my dad passed, my wife and I flew to Israel where my parents were living. And I got to spend like 4 or 5 days with him, really uninterrupted. And again, he had dementia, so it wasn't 100%, but having those few days together were kind of really helpful for me and kind of a true blessing to spend some time. Like we prayed together kind of every day and spent quality time. And I really viewed that as a gift.
That last moment.
Yeah, because I kind of felt like there was a really good chance that I might not get to see him again alive, and so I felt like that was almost a second chance to sort of get some closure and be together and with both my mom and my dad, and it was very meaningful.
Wow.
So.
A lot of times when we go through life experiences and things like that, like in the moment, you mentioned 9/11, 10/7, a case like this, it really gives us a new perspective on life. It changes us.
Yeah.
But sometimes that perspective will last a tiny bit. It'll last for a month, 2 months. We get same thing. We get inspired. Like it comes a New Year's resolution. This year, this type of resolution, and we get inspired. How do you think this is going to change in life perspective, or how has your view so far changed?
It's a great question, and it's hard to answer because I'm still living fresh in it, and it's definitely changed. And we've pretty strictly observed the laws of like Shiva, and I find the laws so brilliant in their nature, and that there's this first period before you have the burial, then there's, the whole Shiva period, then there's the Shloshim, the 30-day period, and getting through that to a year. And, and they say it, like Kaddish is, and I've been reading a few books about Kaddish that have been really interesting and kind of fascinating. Just so much of it is about you. It's not really for the person that, passed. And I find that to be true. And I don't know, I've tapped into this whole subculture of people that are saying Kaddish for a parent or for a loved one. And, it's like trying to catch a flight 3 times a day. It's really not easy, but it's pretty meaningful, I've found. And it's exhausting on one level, but you also, I feel, get a lot out of it. So I'd like to think that it's impacted me for the better, and you think about change, and really informs me as a father. I mean, I've got 3 kids, and you cherish that, and you have to think about how special that is, and how our time on this planet is short-lived, and getting into like, well, what's the meaning of it all, and what's the purpose? And I'm blessed to have 3 beautiful, amazing kids. And that really, again, informs a lot of my life decisions. And I just try really hard to spend quality time with each of them when and where I can. And with my wife, we're married almost 30 years. And that's just really maybe somewhat unusual and special. And I feel very blessed.
Wow. Yeah, one of the things that a person could do right is marry right. So you've definitely done that. But I want to speak about your parents for a second. 75 years is... in this day and age, 75 years is unheard of most times.
Yeah, it's a long time.
What do you think they've done right? What did you see from your perspective that they did it right?
I mean, it was about being life partners. So my mom was 16 years old when they started dating, and they got married when she was 22. And, it's approaching 75 years that they've been together. It's like not even losing like a person. That's like almost like losing some of your limbs after being together for so long. And I think it's about it's aspiring to be life partners, with this individual. It's, I think, them, and then my 3 siblings are pretty amazing, and their spouses, and they've all been role models to me in terms of how do I want to live my life and what I want my legacy to be. I mean, we're maybe getting ahead of ourselves, but thinking about, again, the purpose of it all. And it's not obviously just about, work. And it's, and this actually comes from, I have to give credit to my business partner, David Blumberg. We've been together also for almost 30 years. And he says it all the time, and I think it's really true. It's, in Hebrew, tikkun olam, but it's in English, like, how do we make the world a better place and really leaving the world better than we found it? And so I know that that's top of mind for him, and it's something for me that I'm constantly thinking about as well. And it really bleeds into all aspects of my life. It's whether it's working with an entrepreneur, it's whether it's being a husband or a father or a son or a brother, and really just hopefully trying to, like I said, make the world a better place. Right. That's the goal at the end of the day.
So how does that come out with your work in entrepreneurship, your work in Blumberg?
So I remember, I think when my youngest son was in like second grade, and I was invited, they invited like moms and dads to come and explain to you, like, your kids, like, what your dad or mom does for a living. And, I don't think they're going to really understand venture capital too much. So when I thought about it, I put up, a slide on Rambam, on Maimonides, and who is prolific for sharing, I guess, his perspective on 7 levels of charity. And the top level of charity is really ultimately teaching someone to fish. And so I felt at the end of the day, that kind of describes what I'd like to think about what I do as a VC, right, as an early stage investor. It's all about job creation. It's the engine that drives the economy. Alan Greenspan used to talk about productivity and what drives the economy. It's technology is really that innovation engine. Mm-hmm. And I like to think that we're enabling that. And one of the things I'm most proud of is the companies out of Israel, for example, that we've invested in over the past few decades have probably created over 30,000 jobs globally. Wow. And so that's what I'm most proud of. I mean, it's great that we've had reasonable success, and it's been an amazing journey, and it's been a privilege to learn from and work with so many amazing entrepreneurs and founders over the decades, and literally travel the world with so many of our companies. But I think to me, it's ultimately that's kind of what we're doing is really just creating jobs and helping the economy, hopefully. And even if you fast forward today, I think about it, like, we have companies in the digital healthcare space that are using data, using AI. They're saving lives. Like, that's really profound and special. So it's not just about making money. I mean, obviously, we have investors to report to. We're fiduciaries. That's part of our responsibility. But it's incredible to have an opportunity, like I said, to hopefully make the world a better place in some small way, shape, and form.
Yeah. A job, I fully agree with you, because a job is much more than a paycheck. A job is giving someone fulfillment to do something, wake up into the morning. A job is also, if someone feels productive in their own personal life through a job, they come home, their marriage could be better. They come home, they're more in a better mood.
100%.
They contribute to society, give charity and everything. But I want to talk about your entry into venture capital. So from my understanding, you still are a recovered lawyer.
Reformer lawyer, yes.
And you weren't happy as a lawyer.
This is true. So I went to law school and business school, and for grad school, and never envisioned myself being a lawyer. I guess getting back to like my mom and dad, they were kind of like pushing me, towards education, and that I'll always have that, and I'm grateful for that. And it was always kind of looking for a time. So it was shortly after I got married, and Michelle and I decided to quit our jobs. I was working at a very big law firm, one of the top 10 law firms in the world. Michelle was working in advertising. Her dad had passed away at that time. And we basically just moved to Israel. We went backpacking through Southeast Asia for a couple of months, and then showed up. And then again, timing, I guess, is really everything. This was the mid-'90s, and it was, I think it was Michael Lewis wrote the new thing with like post the Netscape IPO. Technology was booming, and so it was really right place, right time, and getting into this technology, boom in Tel Aviv. And it was a great time and a great transition, and it was something I was a lot more passionate about.
Right, but how did you get into it?
So again, having both a law degree and a business degree, and being an American gringo going to Israel was, unusual and unique, and a good value prop for Israeli entrepreneurs in that ecosystem. And I worked there in Israel, I worked for Hambrecht and Quist, H&Q. They were one of the leading investment, tech banking firms out of Silicon Valley, and they had, presence in Tel Aviv as well. So I landed there. We actually then came back to America, I worked at a number of startups, 2 startups and one later stage IT services company. Before, again, being a nice Jewish husband, I followed my wife out to the Bay Area. She went to med school there. And that was when I connected up with David through actually a cousin of my wife's that was a big tech guy in Israel. He suggested I, sync up with David, who was doing a lot of U.S.-Israel stuff. We connected up in the late 90s, almost 30 years ago at this point. And I guess the rest is history, as they say. So it was just really right place, right time. It was before we launched our first fund. So at the time at Blumberg Capital, we had more of a pledge fund where we invested on behalf of ourselves and some high net worth families. We had about $3 million that we invested into 9 companies. Fortunately, out of the 9 companies, 4 went public, 4 were acquired, and 1 died. And so we had, it was about a 9x cash on cash return. And that was really the catalyst for the first venture fund, which we launched in 2000.
Wow. I mean, now if you look at this 30-year journey, it's over $1 billion in assets right now, starting from $3 million to over $1 billion. That's incredible. So I want to talk about what has that journey been like from 3 million to $1 billion?
So we were a startup at Blumberg Capital, just like we would invest in startups. So I remember starting out and we had champagne taste, but we had a beer budget. So I would take a 5 a.m. flight to save a couple of $100 over the 10 a.m. flight. We were flying coach. We were staying at, 2-star hotels, and we were taking buses, and it was a lot. And, especially leaving at, 4 in the morning every other week from, a wife and 3 kids. We were living in the Bay Area at the time for like 20 years. I remember it was just a really kind of sums it all up. But I remember being in Israel for a board meeting in Tel Aviv with one of the most prominent VCs out of Israel at the time that had many billions of dollars under management at the time, a very prolific, venture firm. And I remember leaving Tel Aviv, and it was literally 24 hours door to door from like Tel Aviv back to my home in the Bay Area in Oakland, California, where we were living. And I'll never forget it because we both boarded the plane. He went to the left, sitting in first class, and I was like in the back row, sitting in coach in the back of the plane. Then we get off the plane, and I still had so I stopped off in New York there for meetings in New York. And I remember he comes out of the airport, and this is like 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's freezing out. It was like wintertime. And he's got, a driver holding up a big sign, and he jumps into his white stretch limousine. And I took the bus to Penn Station and took the train, back to my apartment. And so, we really, and I think it's an important message, I think, for entrepreneurs, investors today. People, like to just say like, oh, look at you today. Right. It's been decades. It's been 30 years to get to this point. So we were a startup ourselves. I kind of feel like we still are a bit of a startup and have a startup ethos. But it was a really long journey. And this was really, 10, 15, 20 years of getting on a plane every other week, fundraising for our funds, working with our entrepreneurs, flying coach, staying in, pretty unattractive hotels, et cetera, motels. And it's okay. It builds character and it makes hopefully some moderate success that we've had today even sweeter because, we worked hard for it. And that really builds, kind of resilience and a sense of appreciation. I think, in Israel they say magili, like, it's a sense of entitlement. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really challenging thing for folks that are coming out these days, don't have a sense and an appreciation for how hard it takes to build, a firm like Blumberg Capital. It's taken us many decades. It's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And people weren't around to remember that and have short-term memory. And maybe we don't like to promote that and advertise it because we like to talk about how successful we are today. But it took a lot to get here, and it was a very, very challenging journey. And I feel lucky that, I was with David Blumberg and that we were a good team. And then we had a lot of support over the years. And but it was not easy, and it was not, boom, like tomorrow, where we became $1 billion. So it took a long time, and people don't always appreciate that.
Did you ever want to give up?
Multiple times. And people have approached me and said, oh, I'm looking to launch a fund and this and that. I think, again, David and I were a terrific team together. We complemented each other. We had others that were super helpful. It was a really long journey, but I don't always encourage people to do that. I think it's really important people appreciate how long the journey took.
Right.
And again, I had a friend of a friend who approached me where he was like, "Oh, we're quitting my job. I'm launching a fund," and he had 3 other guys. And I said, "Listen, I don't know in good faith that I'd recommend you do that." And I shared with him some of the long journey and how hard it was, and we had tremendous mazel and luck and success, and I'll take that any day of the week. And I remember running into him like 10 years later. He maxed out his credit cards. He, took another mortgage out on his house. He almost declared bankruptcy, and like they were, really unsuccessful. They had to break up their partnership. And he was, after a long time, finally went back to like a regular kind of day job where he had a paycheck. And he was like, "You were so right." Like, he didn't fully appreciate, the journey and how long and hard. And A, not everyone has what it takes. B, not everyone is willing to put in and sacrifice. Again, David and I were getting on a plane, almost every other week and flying around the country, raising funds for our funds. And it's really tough and takes a long time, I remember, again, David and I met with a very prolific, VC that everyone would recognize his name. And I remember sitting down with him, and he said to David and I, we were on our journey then, early days, launching like our first or second fund. And he was commenting how he left his old fund, and basically in 30 days he raised a $100 million fund, through a bunch of friends. And I said to him, "Wow, how great it is to be you. You did that in 30 days. David and I have been on the road for 2 years, and we've raised a third of that." And how challenging it was. He's like, "Bruce," and he was very humble. And he said, "Bruce, you misunderstand me. It took me 50 years and 30 days to raise a $100 million fund." And I thought that was just so kind and wise and humble, but true. Now that I've been doing this for 30 years, it's a journey. And if and when you're lucky, maybe good things will happen. But it's about finding the right partners that are also aligned with you, that have the same value. It's about building a culture, establishing an esprit de corps in your organization. And then I don't care what other people say. You can be smart, you can work hard. You really do need mazel at the end of the day. You need luck, you need timing in the marketplace, and so many variables that are out of your control that are macroeconomic issues or microeconomic issues. I mean, who could have ever anticipated 9/11? I mean, sadly, we had one of our companies that basically lost their whole sales and marketing team. They were in the Windows on the World, having a breakfast meeting with a team at Merrill Lynch that were their first customer. They were all killed. Like, literally, they were killed on 9/11. Across the street was an investment group that were going to investment committee to put 10, 15 million into the company. That all went away, and the company ultimately, I think, was acquired for a couple $1 million by a big enterprise, more just because they wanted to find a home for it. I mean, so you could do everything right, which they did. And then, 9/11, 10/7, all these different events can happen that can just change, life and the world as we know it, which sadly has happened. So it's really difficult, and you just want to be with great people that you really respect and want to spend time with. And it gets to the entrepreneurs as well. It's not just about making money. It's they're entrepreneurs. We recently sold a company that we were early investors in, and we were investors in the founding team 3 times. They're just amazing entrepreneurs. And I would take that phone call at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday when I'm doing homework with my kids, but I would be interrupted to work with them because they're amazing people. They're inspiring, and it's a privilege to work with them. And so, we kind of have like a no asshole rule. Like, you really want to work with people that you respect, that you admire. That's true about the culture at my firm. I love the people that we've built together in our organization of Blumberg Capital. They're really amazing people, incredibly talented. And it's true about almost every company I've worked with, an entrepreneur that I've invested in, because it's a long journey. It's a 5, 10, 15-year journey. It's kind of like marriage. There is no divorce. And so it's also bi-directional, meaning the entrepreneur should think about that when they take money from an investor, because it's a really long journey and a long relationship. You want to work with entrepreneurs and investors that you like. And so, again, I feel really blessed and privileged that so many of the people at my team and entrepreneurs that I've invested in and worked with are incredible people that have a similar, set of values. And I view it as a privilege to work with them.
Wow. What do you think were some of the pivotal moments of Blumberg? Because you keep on going back to the luck component, which I fully agree, that you have to, yes, work very, very hard, but you need a certain aspect of luck in order to hit certain lucky breaks to can grow. So when you look at the past 30 years of Blumberg, 25 years, what have been some of the pivotal moments that you propelled you guys to the next level?
Well, I mean, success. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, we are fiduciaries for our limited partners. I think something like 80% of all funds don't raise their next fund,
right,
because typically you need to be in the top quartile or decile in terms of fund performance for investors to keep supporting you. And so, again, we've been really lucky. We have about 10 unicorns.
Wow.
These are companies that we've invested in pre-product, typically pre-revenue, that have grown in value to over $1 billion. And so across multiple continents, we have, Canada, US, and Israel. And that's, I'd like to say we're smart, we work hard, many others do the same thing. We've been really fortunate, I think, to invest in some amazing entrepreneurs. So, for example, out of Israel, Double Verify, Oren Netzer was the founder of the company. We, really invested in the company pre-product, pre-revenue, and today it's, a $5 or $10 billion public standalone company approaching, $500 million in revenue. And, this is an entrepreneur, that we backed pre-product, pre-revenue. Similarly, Nutanix. I just, connected with Dheeraj, who's the founder, CEO, one of the founders and CEOs at Nutanix. The company's grown today. They're a public company worth $20 billion. We seeded them when it was three guys. It was Dheeraj, Mohit, and Ajit were the three co-founders of the company. They were pre-product. They were pre-revenue. I remember they didn't even have a business plan or a deck. This is going back probably like 2008, 2009, and they were drawing up on our whiteboard kind of their vision of how cloud storage was going to change, and they created a category, referred to as this hyper-converged cloud storage space, where they put an intelligent software layer into, combining compute and storage. And, fast forward today, they're doing $2 billion in revenue. And so I think it really starts with that at the end of the day. It's investing in amazing visionary entrepreneurs that are at, a dozen of these companies that we've backed. We have a few more that are gearing up to become, unicorns and beyond. And having the privilege to work with these entrepreneurs is unbelievable. I would say our first superpower, in my opinion, has been the U.S.-Israel, the North America-Israel connectivity that we've been doing pretty successfully for a few decades. The second piece is this innovation council. And that maybe gets to a question of, well, how do you, figure out to invest in a company like a Double Verify, a Nutanix, a Braze, an Adapar, a Hootsuite, a BioCatch, a Funbox, a Yutpo, and some of these other amazing companies. So typically, almost all of our investments are enterprise infrastructure, kind of B2B. Frankly, it's pretty boring. It's not very sexy, but they make money and they're selling into the enterprise. And so we've built out, David and myself over the last 25 plus years, this innovation council. So it's a network of people that run technology for companies like Fidelity and JP Morgan, Checkpoint, Uber, Johnson & Johnson, Common Spirit, Dignity Health, some of the largest organizations in the world. So for example, in the case of Nutanix, before we invested in the company, we put, Dheeraj, Mohit, and Ajit, the three founders, in front of a few dozen of these council members. And we basically said, they gave the pitch and we were kind of a fly on the wall, and they would say, here's the problem, here's the solution. Then we kind of hit the pause button and we would talk offline to those council members and be like, what do you think? Like, is this, so it's grown now to like 200 folks.
Oh, wow.
Plus and growing. We just had a dinner actually here in New York. We do dinners once a year in each, in Israel, Florida, New York, and San Francisco.
Right.
So we do dinners once a year. We do typically quarterly sessions, but before we invest in any of our companies, we're typically sending off an email to, the 200 council members, and within an hour, we'll get, 10, 20, 30 responses of, this is really interesting, this is a big problem, or they might say, well, I think Datadog or Shopify solves for this. This isn't so compelling. Mm-hmm. And so it really is an extension of our team that has just grown, and it's a great ecosystem and network that I remember in the case of Nutanix, where dozens of our council members were like, this is a big problem. if these guys can actually build it and solve for this, that's exciting. And we spend tens or dozens of millions of dollars a year on this, and we can shave off a lot of that expense that we're spending on EMC, VM, et cetera. So, I mean, I was personally, for example, on the first call, Dheeraj and I were upstairs in our office in San Francisco, and we were chatting with Ian Miller, who is the CIO at Weil Gotshal, one of the biggest law firms in the world. And Ian's part of our council. And Dheeraj and I were like sweating. It was like summer. It was like hot. And we didn't have any customers. And we gave sort of Ian the pitch, and he said no. And Dheeraj and I were looking at each other, and we're like, oh my God. So I'm like, Dheeraj, listen, you're part of the council. This is great technology. You're going to thank us. Like, you got to give it a shot. And there was just like silence. And Dheeraj and I were sweating. And then after a few seconds, Ian was like, okay, we'll do it. I'll do a POC. I'll do initial purchase order. We'll figure out the details. It was like a $75,000 POC with Ian. And then probably, I don't know, a year or two later, Ian Miller stood up at one of our council meetings, and he said, I just want to thank Bruce and the Blumberg team. We've basically ripped and replaced all of our EMC and VM, and we've replaced it in NetApp, and we've replaced it with Nutanix. It's amazing. And by the way, Bruce, if you guys have any other really interesting hot technology, love to take a look at it. So like, well, funny you should mention that, Ian. So then we brought him Cyvera, which was a zero-day attack cybersecurity company. And again, he was the first, POC with Cyvera, which ended up very quickly getting acquired by Palo Alto for a couple $100 million, like within less than 2 years. And then I mentioned I met with Dheeraj, who was one of the founders and the CEO of Nutanix. Dheeraj told me that $75,000 purchase order, I think today it may be in excess of like $10 million that Weil Gotshal is spending. And many of the other introductions that we made through that council are also customers at Nutanix. And the same story across Braze and Double Verify and many of our portfolio companies. I remember, again, sitting with Oren Netzer, one of our CIOs who ran innovation for WPP, one of the largest brand agencies in the world. And I sat in the room with Oren Netzer, and his name was Joe Hollander, who was the CIO at WPP. And Double Verify is basically solving this problem of online ad verification. So, for example, if you're a marketing team at Verizon or Disney, you put together dozens of characteristics that go into your marketing plan. Mm-hmm. And, for example, you don't want ads showing up on porn sites. You don't want them showing up on gambling sites. You don't want them showing up on a competitor site. Right. Things of that nature. You want it to be above the fold in certain locations. So WPP manages ad spend for many of the largest brands in the world. Right. And so Oren gave the pitch, the short pitch to Joe, and then Oren left the room, and I said to Joe, like, hey, well, what do you think? He's like, well, I have to tell you. He's like, some of the largest brands in the world that we work with right now spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on their online spend, and they're going to pull 100% of their online spend because this is back in 2010, and it was the wild, wild west on the internet. So ads were showing up everywhere. So completely out of your control. And Disney, for example, was like, we have zero tolerance. Our ads can't show up on porn sites or gambling sites or things of that nature. And that's what Double Verify basically solves for. And it was a rocket ship. Mm-hmm. And, again, it went from pre-product, pre-revenue to a market leader and, a multi-billion-dollar IPO and an incredible success story. And the same thing with Braze and BioCatch and Adapar and many, many other companies. So we've been really fortunate and privileged and blessed to invest in incredible entrepreneurs. Our job is, I would say, relatively easy for the most part. We just have to make one decision: do we want to invest in this company? Obviously, we Mike Moritz from Sequoia is pretty famous for saying that he only, it's a little bit glib. He's like, I only have to make one decision a year, like which company to invest in. I mean, there's some truth in that. We're typically the largest shareholder. We're on the board. We're very actively engaged. We're oftentimes working, to help companies. For example, BioCatch today is an interesting story, and they've had an investor come in and basically want to buy everybody out at north of $1 billion price point. We actually didn't sell. We love the company. They're doing amazing. They're basically profitable, and they're one of the fastest growing companies. And we've done all the work to get to that point, so why sell now and sub-optimize? But tragically, when I was on the board at the company, one of the founders, who was the CEO, died. They were really undercapitalized, and we helped them by finding a CEO, bringing in a chairman of the board, bringing in Amex, bringing in Bain Capital as an investor. I think they put in $100 million plus into the company, helping them with some of their first customers and partners. So we weren't, passive as an investor. We're active. And I remember introducing them to a friend of mine who joined them as a CMO. Another friend joined them as general counsel. So really helping the company over the life. And today, thank God, they've been an incredibly successful company. So I think our promise as early stage investors is we promise, and this is not trivial, we promise not to screw up your company, which many investors do. There's, I think, a lot of hubris, a lot of arrogance on Sand Hill Road across the VC ecosystem, maybe for reasons they've had a lot of success. So number one, we promise that. And number two, hopefully we can help the company leveraging our innovation council, leveraging our network and the relationships we have to bring value to the company. So it's been a journey. I have some gray hair and scar tissue, as you can see. But again, it's really been a privilege. I mean, and having in my prior life worked as a lawyer, worked as a banker, been an entrepreneur and doing startups myself, bringing those, hopefully some of those different skill sets together to work with companies and really just to be an active coach. I mean, it's really lonely being a founder and being an entrepreneur of your company. It's a really, really tough job. And so we have tremendous empathy and perspective and appreciation for how difficult that is. We love to get in on the ground floor as an early investor, help when and where and how we can. I mean, my team we love going to trade shows. I mean, I've been going to the Javits Center here in New York, to like NRF, the retail show. It's called The Big Show, for 15, 20 years, walking the trade show, finding prospective customers and partners for our portfolio companies, learning and understanding about the business and what they're doing, and just trying to be helpful. And so I think having a sense of humility and a sense of perspective of who and what we are, and great, we've had some success. We've obviously had missteps too. We've learned a lot. They asked Gene Kleiner, who's again a prolific VC from Kleiner Perkins, probably one of the greatest venture capitalists. They asked him, well, how do you become a VC? And he said it costs $20 million. And there's such truth in that comment of you learn, you make mistakes. It's a bit of your brain is like a pattern recognition machine learning engine. And hopefully, over time, you make fewer mistakes. And again, it's less about the mistakes. It's, there's type 1 and type 2 errors. So it's okay if you write a check into a company and you lose a couple $1 million. That's our job at the end of the day. We're venture capitalists. We shouldn't take the venture out of venture capital. What's frustrating is for example, on the seed round, we passed on Palantir. Today it's a $90 billion, public company. So those are the ones that are hard to swallow. And that's going to happen. It's not perfect information. I remember we sat down and had lunch with Alex Karp and Joe Lonsdale, the founders of Palantir back in the day. And, we were trying desperately to convince Alex, who was the CEO, he was convinced their Palantir was only going to sell them to government. And we're like, you're never going to build a standalone company if you just sell them to government. You have to sell to financial services, insurance, other verticals. Years later, he came back and agreed and, thought we were right. Unfortunately, it didn't help us. We missed the investment. But the good news is, Joe Lonsdale came back to us and started Adipar. And we invested in Adipar. And again, like Palantir, the valuation was a little bit high. We struggled, but kind of fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And so we invested in Adipar. And fast forward today, it's a multi-billion-dollar company. It's going to be a great investment for us. We're still, early investors and shareholders. And so, again, I think it's just learning from some of your, mistakes and hopefully not making those same mistakes twice. And it's weird. Two of my brothers are physicians and my wife's a doctor. And, you chat with them. And I say, imagine you're a doctor and you see 10 patients and 9 out of 10 patients die. You're done. You're going to prison. You're done as a physician. In our industry, that's okay. As long as the 1 out of 10 that we invested in becomes a Palantir and it's worth $90 billion, it's more than okay. And again, we've thankfully had a much better track record than that. More often than not, our companies don't typically die. I mean, they get acquired, we'll make our money back, we'll make a 1, 2, 3x. That's not really what our job is. That's not what I'm in business to do. We're in business to try to hopefully invest in companies like Nutanix, Braze, and Double Verify, and Adipar, where they make 10x, 50x, 100x. That's really what our job is at the end of the day. So more often than not, even when we quote unquote fail, we're investing in innovative technology, and the companies the founders are geniuses, and they're going to get acquired by a Palo Alto, by a Checkpoint, by a Cisco, by a Facebook, Meta, whomever, and we'll do okay, and the founders will find a home for their technology more often than not. But again, our job is really can we invest in this company and put in 10 or 15 million over the life of the company and take out 100 million, 500 million, $1 billion. So that's our mindset, and that's what we think about as early stage investors, which is really hard because, again, we're typically investing in this company pre-product, pre-revenue, and so there's just an incredible amount of risk.
Right.
But it's exciting.
Do you still have excitement out to this day? Do you still get excited about it?
I pinch myself every day. I love what I do. Maybe that's coming across. I don't know if it comes across in a podcast. But, again, having been a lawyer, having been a banker, having done some startups, I feel it's a privilege to do what I do. It's really a privilege and an honor to, meet people like yourself, to talk to other entrepreneurs that have a vision of becoming the next Meta, the next Cisco, the next Checkpoint. That's what keeps the juices flowing. And so I love what I do. I love waking up every day and learning and being challenged and being taught by entrepreneurs, an area of hyper-converged cloud storage that I didn't think about, digital media applications for the SMB business. How can we optimize, financial services and transform an industry, or in healthcare, like saving lives? Like that gives me goosebumps that when you hear from an entrepreneur, and, we've invested in companies that have started, that literally people would have died. The number one cause of death in the healthcare system is medical error. And so leveraging data, leveraging machine learning to optimize outcomes for the patient is unbelievable. If you think about, like, in the airline industry, imagine if the TSA and the transportation industry would only track 5% of the airplanes that are flying at any given time. That's not feasible. You have to have transparency on 100% of the airplanes that are flying around. Otherwise, they're going to start crashing into each other. That's basically healthcare. Up until today, it's slowly being transformed, but they really only have like a proxy of some of the data. So they're looking at 2, 3, 4, 5% of the data that's out there in healthcare. But now with data, with GPU-based technology, with artificial intelligence, we can look at 100% of the data and really just optimize outcomes across the healthcare system. So things like that are transformative, and to be part of that transformation is really a privilege and an honor. It's incredibly exciting, and I'm learning and growing every day, and I'd love to keep doing this for the next 30 years.
Well, one of the things that's coming out is that you've been able to attract some phenomenal category-defining founders to Blumberg. You look at Nutanix, you look at the BioCatch, Yotpo, many of the Braves. I know some of these founders personally. They're very, very special people.
Amazing. Yeah, they are.
Special people. My question is, how do they come to Blumberg? But the B is, like, what are you looking for in a personality perspective? Because not necessarily are you going to see it in their, eventually once they start a company, you'll see it in their actual, how they operate. But at that point in time, these people don't have operational experiences. It's more on a personality. So what are you looking for? What did you see? And even for future founders.
It's a great question, and it's difficult, and it's definitely not a science. It's an art. And, historical success is obviously no guarantee of future success. I remember we invested in Oren Netzer's first company, Double Verify, which was, a grand slam home run and a multi-billion-dollar IPO. He started another company, and Oren made a lot of money for us. And so we looked at it. I think we passed on it 2 or 3 times. And I remember, to his credit, he was at one of our limited partner meetings, and he mentioned how the Blumberg Capital team were right for passing, and he shut that company down. And he started now another company, and that company we did invest in and we've looked at. And again, he's an amazing entrepreneur. It's really a difficult journey, and there's no necessarily, secret success of like, oh, well, I've done this in the past, I'm going to guarantee success in the future. I mentioned this other company where we funded the team 3 times. There's another group of entrepreneurs, I funded them 2 or 3 times as well. So we love entrepreneurs that we know and we love. Many times entrepreneurs come to us where they are lieutenants at a prior company that we've backed. So they've maybe had an opportunity to interface with us. We've spent time with them because we're not just working with the C-level executives necessarily. We're working with VPs and other folks across your organization. And so getting the chance to work with them. It's, as I mentioned before, it's sort of bi-directional diligence where an entrepreneur could say, hey, I like Bruce and the Blumberg team. These guys are good guys, which we aspire and strive to be. You're not getting a lot of ego and attitude from us. We're here to help. It's your company. So that's very much our philosophy with an entrepreneur. Other funds have a very different perspective. They're going to come in. Some of the big funds on Sand Hill Road are famous for coming in, funding you, taking control, changing management.
Right.
And so that's just not our MO. So we're not going to fund those type of entrepreneurs. And they're obviously not looking for money, from us necessarily. So our objective is, how can we help you be successful? How can we coach you? How can we support you? And, work with you to make you incredibly successful over this journey. Our objective is not to take you out of your position as the founder or CEO or CTO or whatever it is in the company. And so it's trust and verify. And the other side of your question is leveraging that innovation council. At the rawest level, it's, what is the problem? What is your value proposition? And what are the barriers to entry? So trying to answer those questions, leveraging our council, leveraging our network, bringing them to dozens of prospective customers, even if they haven't built a product, to get that validation, to see if there's pull from the marketplace, that there's demand. So we spend a lot of our time talking to people that run innovation for some of the largest organizations in the world. And so the metaphor we use is like, we really want to skate to the puck and understand, where are things moving in cybersecurity? Where are they moving in enterprise SaaS? Where are they moving in terms of supply chain logistics and healthcare? And then trying to then find amazing entrepreneurs that are doing that. I remember a fintech company that we funded, we basically gave his pitch. He walked into the room, and effectively what they're doing is they've created a marketplace for SMBs to find solutions across the stack in financial services. We were looking for that company. Like, we had proactively, written some white papers ourselves, and his round was oversubscribed, but he really liked the fact that we understood the pain point and were able to add value along the journey that he was going to have for the life of his company. So again, we can't boil the ocean. We don't do everything. We've typically shied away, and when we've dabbled in consumer-related things, we've typically fallen short. It's just not our core area of expertise. So it's not getting too caught up on reading your press and your historical successes. It's staying ruthlessly focused. And many entrepreneurs that come to us, for example, we were seed investors in a unicorn company called Fundbox that's also doing SMB lending. That's like a pre-IPO type of company out of Israel. One of the founders, Yuval Aryav, he and I have co-lectured and been co-professors at Columbia in the grad school. We've done that together. I also teach at my undergrad, Yeshiva University. He's coming as a guest speaker there. He brought us FundGuard, another pre-unicorn company in Fund 4 that's also in financial services. They all work together in 8200 in the same units. Lior Yogev, who's the founder CEO at FundGuard, which is an amazing company that's just raised a $100 million round earlier this year. Again, we seeded the company pre-product, pre-revenue. We were the first investors. We've been on the board for the last 5, 6, 7 years of this journey for this company, over the life of the company. He was referred to us by Yuval from Fundbox. Lior is the founder at FundGuard. He referred us to Joshu, an insurtech company that's in Fund 5, that also they work together in the same intelligence unit. And, Lior's a Goldman Sachs, Columbia Business School alum. So it's, a lot of the founders are, know each other. They talk. There's a profile. Again, we appreciate, the opportunity to work with these amazing entrepreneurs that are brilliant and trying to really disrupt. And however we could try to be helpful, over the course of that journey. And I think it's somewhat unique. There are other investors that might have an agenda of, selling very quickly, not being supportive over the long term. And I think the fact that we've stayed small and early, intentionally and deliberately, that's kind of our core focus. That's what we love. We were approached 10, 15 years ago about raising like billions of dollars. And for us, it's never been about AUM. It's about doing something we're passionate about. It's not about the management fee. It's really about the carry, the equity in these companies that will create wealth creation for us and the entrepreneurs, hopefully. And we just, David, myself, and by extension, our team are very passionate about that. It's what we love. is I think we're pretty good in that we've been doing it for a really long time. I mean, I've probably looked at, approaching 40,000 companies over the course of my career. And having that, kind of learning, that experience, and then when an entrepreneur comes to us and says, oh, someone wants to buy me for 250 million, how do you respond to that? And again, this is not new for us. We've, seen companies grow from pre-product, pre-revenue to over $1 billion in revenue. And so just having scar tissue and learnings from that journey, I think we're very lucky and very fortunate. And hopefully we can be a friend and an ally to the entrepreneur over that journey. Our companies have probably raised in excess of $10 billion in subsequent financing. So being thoughtful about capitalization risk when an entrepreneur comes to us, especially from Tel Aviv, and says, I'm raising a seed round, and I'm thinking through who's going to lead the A, the B, the C, the D, who are investors that we've co-invested with these firms many, many times over the course of that journey. So, for example, I was actually just on a call earlier today with Yoav. He's the founder of Pantera, which is an amazing fintech company out of Israel as well that we seeded with Uri Levin, who was one of the founders of Waze. And, chatting with last year, they raised a, sub $100 million round from Iconic. Iconic were investors with me. They came in late stage at Braze that went through an IPO. And, we were seed investors in Braze as well. So the Iconic guys chatting with them last year, trying to help navigate and get to the sort of finish line of them to put in, with Lightspeed and others, around for, Yoav and Pantera and what they're doing. And they're crushing it. I mean, they're just an amazing company. And again, it's been a journey. They've been around, they've pivoted, they've iterated, but they've really hit their stride. They have trillions of dollars sort of under management across their platform with what they're doing. They're a market leader. And to me, that gives us goosebumps because I remember, day zero with Yoav when we were just starting out and trying to think about, and the company was called FIEX or Feeks. Right. And, again, they changed the name. Now they're Pantera. And that whole, journey and the evolution in that company. So it's incredible. It's, thinking about Benny Nachman, we recently exited that company. Benny was the founder and CEO of Finaro. They used to be called Credirax. It's a transaction processing platform that was acquired for a little bit under $1 billion. And what's amazing, and we love Benny, and Benny's really knowledgeable in fintech. And he's advising us on other fintech investment opportunities that we're looking at together. We funded him again in another company called Jazzby. Credirax Finaro was a company in Fund 2. Jazzby is a company in Fund 4. We're looking at companies together with Benny that we might invest in at a Fund 5. These are folks that come back and invest in our funds as limited partners. And so it's a really virtuous ecosystem. And as I tell my students and as I tell my kids, at the end of the day, all we have is Shem Tov. Like, a good name. Like, just, it's really important we hold it, we sort of under-promise, we over-deliver, we try to, communicate and over-communicate, we be transparent. And I think that's, what you try to do over the course of your career, which sounds somewhat easy and trivial, but most and many people just don't, as you and I know. Again, you're dealing sometimes with billions and billions of dollars, and that can maybe change people and cause people to act differently. So I think just, doing what you say you're going to do, being a straight shooter. I'm proud to be partnered with David Blumberg for almost 30 years, that he holds himself that way, that, we try to hold ourselves to that standard. As you know, I went to Yeshiva University for my undergrad, for high school, for undergrad, and their whole mantra was Torah Umada, is Torah Umada. It's really, ethics and science. And I learned all those things in school, and they were academic. But then going on to grad schools and then going on to the workforce and really implementing that ethos, that culture of making sure, doing the right thing, or trying. We don't always do the right thing for sure. We've made lots of mistakes. No one's perfect, obviously. But really trying to be, proud of ourselves and, what we've done, how we've held ourselves. I'm proud of ourselves that, I think for the most part, we've really tried hard to care about our reputation, care about our brand, and do the right thing by an entrepreneur. And again, we might disagree with an entrepreneur. And I've seen in life, it's not so much what you say, it's how you say it. And of course, we can disagree with an entrepreneur, but we can disagree respectfully and calmly and truth seek together to be like, okay, well, what should we do here? And at the end of the day, we're fiduciaries. We have a responsibility to our investors and to the company. So I'm not necessarily focused on the entrepreneur, what's maybe in the entrepreneur's best interest, because the entrepreneur may not be focused on the company either.
Right.
Sometimes everyone has a different, and they can be diverging agendas. Hopefully they line up. More often than not, they do. We always try to be sensitive and thoughtful about the entrepreneur as well. But really, at the end of the day, our job is, as a fiduciary to the company, what's in the best interest of the company. And so we're always thinking about that from day one. And again, we're very transparent with the entrepreneurs that that is our agenda. And more often than not, that all lines up together.
A recurring theme that I'm hearing is that a lot of your founders keep coming back to you guys, either for their second company, their third company, but they also come back and participate as an LP. At the same time, they're going to recommend their friends.
And they send us their friends, yeah,
Right.
which is amazing.
So I think this goes back to another point you mentioned, which is Shem Tov, having a good name.
Yeah.
So how did you keep that good name in check? But also, how did you make sure that success didn't get to your head? And you should have such humility and able to face that, because at the end of the day, you could, like you said, you could have raised $1 billion fund, and we'll get to also why don't you raise $1 billion fund? But you could walk around with ego. You to a certain degree, you've earned it. Like,
yeah, I mean, listen, I'm married for almost 30 years, so I have an amazing wife who definitely keeps me in check, and she's amazing. And she herself is a doctor and a neuroscientist and a lovely human being. And so it's not really that difficult to stay humble. She reminds me every day, of where I came from. And again, my roots. And then we touched on earlier, like my dad passing. You have ego, but I spent the last 2 years with my dad, who was suffering from dementia and, had 24/7 care. At the end of the day, this is all meaningless. It's so again, I think spending my life under the Yeshiva University rubric of, learning about Jewish ethics, the meaning and purpose of life, and tikkun olam, of trying to make the world a better place. I think that, and again, just living life, it's not that difficult to stay pretty humble. My kids are amazing, and I learn from them every day and cherish the time with them. And they and my wife Michelle have taught me to find time to laugh at myself and life in general. And again, thank God we've had some reasonable success, but life is complicated, and this is all, at the end of the day, relatively superficial. And I think it's just having an appreciation for, a higher being, and that, this is your place. And, as Golda Meir used to say, don't be so humble, you're not so great. It keeps things very under control. So, these companies and work is great, but, life, again, spending time with your dad who had dementia and, needed someone to help him brush his teeth is, and that's where we're probably, if we're lucky, we're all going to end up there. So, lots of stories around that. But I think it's just appreciating how blessed we are, how privileged we are. I mean, I feel like I won the ovarian lottery, being born in this amazing country. It's still the greatest country in the world. It's the greatest democracy. Obviously, Israel, kind of a number two, a smaller country and an incredible democracy in the Middle East, and a beacon of hope and light. And having that, and having, family, being surrounded by, being blessed to have, beautiful, healthy children, a wife, business partners, and a team that are so much more talented and smart than I am, working together with them, it's great. I'm just happy that I'm doing something that I love, that I'm passionate about, and that there are opportunities for me to give back. Whether it's in my capacity as an adjunct professor teaching at Yeshiva University at my undergrad, when I was teaching at Columbia University in the grad school there for a number of years, and maybe providing some feedback, mentorship to others. I feel really, really lucky, really blessed, and I'm very thankful.
Wow. How do you think about charity and philanthropy?
So again, there's, I guess, various forms. To me, there's giving back financially, of course, and I've been pretty strict growing up, Jewish, Orthodox, it's in the Torah, in the Old Testament, giving, tithing, giving Meiser. So at the end of the year, I just give between 10 and 20%, absolutely unconditionally, put it in my donor advised fund, and it's a privilege to give that away the following year, and I feel really blessed to have that. That was an amazing thing, setting up a donor advised fund. By the way, it's really easy, really, you don't need to be rich to do it. You know, you could put a couple $1,000s into it, and then just have that discipline. And so I joined Federation when I was out in Oakland in the Bay Area. I joined the Federation, and as a condition of joining like their investment committee, you had to set up a donor advised fund, and it was the best thing in the world. And I probably did that, 20 something years ago, and then just, it's hard to keep track of your donation and your charity, and so just being able to put it into, now I have it at Schwab, a donor advised fund, but you can have it pretty much any financial institution. So I love that. That's amazing. So this way you give it away and you don't think about it, and you're done, and then you just give it away the following year. So that's number one. Number two, there's still no replacement for actually doing things. So, I mean, for my daughter's birthday, we went to like a food kitchen or something, and for Holocaust survivors before one of the holidays, and we're packing up food and meals for people. And that just is an incredibly gratifying thing to be a part of that. And I've done that for many, many years with my kids when they were little out in the Bay. We would, before all the Jewish holidays, we would pack up meals and bring them with my kids and some of their friends to, people in need. And just, again, when you see how lucky and privileged we are and how much we have in our lives to give, it's in the Torah, in the Old Testament, it says, when it comes to charity, it says the word vinatnu, a Hebrew word, which means to give. It's actually, the word is a palindrome, which means when you spell it either way, it spells the same way, backwards and forwards. And the point is, the commentaries say, and I truly believe this, like the person that gives really gets more than the person that I'm giving to. And it's really just a privilege to be able to help. And again, I get goosebumps when I think about, feeding other people. I mean, this is trivial, but I try every day to give a homeless person food. And it's sort of meaningless on the scheme of things at a macro level. Like if you talk to big philanthropists, they're like, well, that's silly, you're wasting your time. I feel that if I've done nothing else for the day, I feel like I've accomplished something, and I feel good about myself. And it's obviously it's small in the scheme of things, but it's to me something that keeps it honest and real. Like I used to always, every time there was a fast, I would always, after a fast, before I break my fast, I would try to feed a number of homeless people to give them food and stuff. So I think it's about empathy, it's about perspective, it's about trying to give back. And again, I'm really fortunate that I had my parents, my brothers, my wife as role models, as examples, our families, Yeshiva University, and that whole influence of, the concept of giving back and Tikkun Olam and having that value system in place. And again, I just feel privileged every day to wake up that I am in a position to do something good. I feel really blessed and really lucky. And that's really what drives me forward, is just being able to hopefully make a small impact and contribute in various ways, whether it's dollars, whether it's different organizations. And there's, unfortunately, post-October 7th, there's so much need in Israel specifically that we try to contribute to. Tens of thousands of people are homeless in the South and the North with what's going on. Obviously, in this country as well, there's tremendous demand. So, again, being able to, in some small way, give back is, gives me such a sense of self and a sense of fulfillment. And I feel great about it.
How do you transfer those to your children? Because you're a 30-year overnight success. You've worked very, very hard. You built Blumberg together with David into what it is today. So you've had, the hard work that goes into it. But at the end of the day, your children are being brought up on the opposite end. So how do you transfer all these values of Tikkun Olam, of charity, of Shem Tov, of all these things to your children, and they're not going to have to work as hard as you did?
Yeah. Well, they do. They do have to work. Thank God they're talented, they're bright, they're capable, and they should all work and achieve on their own. First off, I don't want to cheat them out of that success. I remember as a kid growing up, when I was a teenager, my brother and I worked as waiters, and I felt so amazing getting that paycheck. We worked hard. It was hard work. We'd walk, because we often worked on a Shabbat afternoon, and we'd walk 2 miles in the freezing cold. We'd go to Hashkama, the early service, and then we'd go work as a waiter. And then we made $50, whatever it was, but we were thrilled. It's an amazing feeling of achievement. And it doesn't have to be, selling a company for $1 billion. It's working at a soup kitchen and seeing someone smile and giving someone food. It's working as a waiter and getting a paycheck. It's just taking pride in what you've done and your sense of self. So I would never want to cheat my kids out of that. And they're going to hopefully achieve great things on their own, and can. And it's just being a model, hopefully trying to model that. I remember my younger son once, we were, I forget if we were like delivering meals or something. He was like, Dad, like, oh, let's buy a nice sports car. Like, I saw you sold a company. And I'm like, that's not what we're about. Like, that's not who we are. We don't need a nice sports car. Like, we can, give back, on so many levels to so many people. So I think just trying to, again, maintain that ethos, that sense of humility, and there's so much to be humble by. And listen, so much of the success is others. It's not me. It's the entrepreneurs. It's, my team and a million other things. And again, obviously, not to get spiritual maybe, but, God's intervention. And, I truly believe that. And when you have that perspective, it's not so hard to stay relatively humble and hopefully transmit that to our kids. So we try to be role models, and we love to go to temple together, my wife and I, for 30 years. We go Friday night, we go Saturday, we keep the Shabbat. They say a family that prays together stays together. And honestly, like, I love Judaism and religion and what it's brought to us. It's truly a gift. I think Shabbat is the greatest invention of all time. Like, my kids, I play this game with them over the years of like, hey, what's the greatest invention? Like, was it the iPhone or, what have you? And to me, it's Shabbat. Like, turning off for 25 hours is such a privilege and such a gift to just be present and be with, your family, with your loved ones, and celebrate life. So having the holidays are just real treasures and gifts. And hopefully that, by osmosis, will be transmitted over, because those are the values that, my siblings have, my wife's siblings have, and we truly feel, really privileged.
How do you feel like those values translate into your dealings with entrepreneurs and the business world?
I think it's what we touched on before. It's always, trying to underpromise and overdeliver. It's being forthright. If I say something, I mean that. I don't care if we've signed a document or not. If, like, we shake hands and this is what we've agreed to, then that's how I'm going to behave. And so what you're going to get with us. Yeah. And I've seen, again, there's just a lot of people that are not like that in the business world. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, when you're dealing with, millions and billions of dollars, people don't do that. They overpromise, they underdeliver, they misrepresent, and maybe intentionally, maybe some not intentionally. Right. And so I think it's important. And again, I'm really proud of our track record and our team and, what David and I have done together and as a firm, as an organization. And we have an amazing partner, Yodfat in Tel Aviv, who manages our office there, and Steve, manages our team in San Francisco, and other folks on our team. And so I think we're unique in that regard. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't others. Obviously, there are. Mm-hmm. It's kind of unique and special that when people kind of do what they say they're going to do and stick to their, promises and their word. And to me, that's like everything. Like, with an entrepreneur, like, and again, I don't think there's really a company you could speak to that I've been involved with where I've been on the board, where I've been with that entrepreneur, where an entrepreneur would say, Bruce lied to me, he misrepresented, and I just wouldn't do that. It's just, life is too short. They may not always like what I have to say. We may not always agree. Right. That's okay. Like, we're entitled to disagree, of course. But I think, I really value trust, transparency, loyalty, and I think people appreciate that over the long term. And I believe it. Frankly, I'm doing it, but I think it's self-serving anyway. It's in my best interest, because I think it really does differentiate me from many others who would want to work with someone who's dishonest and disloyal and putting themselves first and egomaniacal and all these other things. So to a certain degree, I think it just makes sense. Right. But it's how we were raised. And again, getting back to my dad, like, my dad was a dentist. I mean, I heard stories after his passing of so many people that he took care of and treated and helped and never charged. And people would, bring him a challah, because many growing up in Muncie, a very religious community, many yeshiva students just had no money, and they'd always come and he would, take care of them. In fact, I heard it from a friend of ours who was like, in our community who was very religious, and they had a terrible emergency, and they came on the Sabbath, where my dad worked on them on the Sabbath. And then after the Sabbath, the gentleman was like, "Oh, I want to pay you." And my dad's like, "I'm not taking money for the Sabbath." And he's like, "Can I always have emergencies on the Sabbath then?" And he was a very religious guy, and he was sort of joking, but it was kind of funny. And that was, I think, how my dad kind of rolled. And I respect that. I mean, that's really something to respect and admire, that he wasn't like the wealthiest guy, but, you know, he was a mensch. He was stand-up, and that's a big deal.
And that makes the biggest difference.
I think so. I think so.
Going to mention, and people that Shem Tov and humility, I think that also represents, some of your LPs that you've attracted. Like if you look at your first fund, you've had the pillars of the Jewish community that were part of your first fund. You had Sir Jacob Rothschild, who's the anchor investor of your first fund. You have the Tisch family. You have multiple other families that have been massive pillars around the world in general, in philanthropy and everything.
Sure.
But I think of Rothschild. Like, what did you learn from Sir Jacob Rothschild?
Well, it was interesting when he approached us and heard about us. This was Lord Jacob Rothschild out of London. And at the time, David and I were working on a company called Wine Shopper that was in the wine space. And Amazon was interested in investing, and Kleiner Perkins wanted to put in like $50 million into the company. They were trying to really transform and put this as like a button on Amazon that the next category was going to be wine. And so Lord Jacob approached us and heard about Blumberg Capital through that. At the time, we didn't have a fund. We were more of a pledge fund.
Right.
And he said, "Listen, you guys are really smart, talented. You help companies tremendously, but you don't have a fund. Like that, you're missing like the third, fourth leg of the stool." He's like, "I want to back you guys." He's like, "My family, we made two mistakes. We bet on the wrong continent. You know, they bet on Europe, obviously, and they really missed the whole technology wave." And he's like, "I want to back you guys so that I think you can be the next Sequoia, the next Kleiner that can transform the industry." So that was like his initial thesis in investing us. He was a very kind, gracious, humble, understated human being. I mean, he came to many events that we hosted where he would speak. David and I had multiple trips out to meet him in London and his team as well. It was tragic when he passed away. I was actually in Tel Aviv, and I was flying through London for some other meetings and went to sort of pay condolences to the family and the team in London. And we're very thankful. I mean, he was really like a patriarch of the family, and he was an anchor investor. And part of the other dimension of why he wanted to invest with us as well, with the Tisch family and the Lauder families, these were three families that basically built the state of Israel financially. Right. I mean, you can't walk around Israel and not see their names all across the country. And they love the fact that, we're fiduciaries, but we're also Zionists. David and I are, I've lived and worked in Israel and speak the language. David's been there hundreds of times. He was the fourth operating executive at Checkpoint Software and investing early into Israeli technology, which I can get to in a second. But those families really loved the fact that we were going to invest in Israeli technology. We were not just an Israeli fund, and they liked that as well, that we were U.S., we were North America. But Israel was an important component, and it has stayed a very important component. It's typically, there's no specific mandate, but it's typically about a third, 25 to 35% of our total portfolio, depending on how you define Israeli companies, have been Israeli companies that we've invested into, and we've done it, reasonably successfully. And they really liked that, element of the fund, where they felt they were getting Israel exposure, the opportunity to really help Israel, but we're Zionists, but we're fiduciaries. And that was some of David Blumberg's legacy as well. He worked for the Bronfman family in Montreal. And this is going back to the early 80s before we even, launched Blumberg Capital and launched our first fund. But the Bronfman family said to David, like, "Oh, let's invest in Israel," which we invested. And David almost jokingly said we should buy the whole Tel Aviv Stock Exchange because the P multiple was like 4 or 5 or 6. And so they started slowly, and he led the investment. They bought a company, a BIC, for about $20 million, which they immediately flipped into Teva Pharmaceuticals for about 20% of Teva Pharmaceuticals, which became a $30 billion holding and probably one of the best investments they ever made. Wow. And so that was, again, back in the early 80s before David, left and went to San Francisco to start Blumberg Capital in the early 90s. I joined up with him in the later 90s when we had the Pledge Fund. Wow. And again, we're invested in Checkpoint, DSP Group, EFI, Creo. These were 4 big IPOs out of the Israel ecosystem. And that led for a lot of deal flow out of Israel, cybersecurity. In our early days, in 2000 when we launched the first, pledge fund, our first formal fund 1. Fast forward today, we're investing out of Fund 5. It's a $225 million early stage fund. We'll, in the early days of, basically getting ready to launch Fund 6, which will probably be another 250 early stage, venture fund, and hopefully keep doing what we're doing. And we did launch a venture growth fund last year. And that really was driven, again, by our limited partners, where we had done, up until then, we had done a bunch of special purpose vehicles and SPVs, sort of doubling down on some of our winners, like this Finaro company. I think we put in close to $20 million through SPVs in subsequent financing rounds. Our early fund was smaller. It was a $90 million fund. And so our LPs were like, you've done really well with some of those follow-ons. So this venture growth fund was meant and is meant to, A, double down on the best of the best across funds 2, 3, 4, 5. And then B, go outside of the fund as well. So it will not just be all Blumberg Capital portfolio companies, but go outside the fund as well to find amazing things maybe that we missed or passed on, and then we can jump in on a Series B. So the early stage funds will do a pre-seed, seed, and A, and the venture growth fund could jump in kind of on a Series B and beyond. And so that's working out well. And we've already made a handful of investments into the best of the best. Like I mentioned, FundGuard before, that raised $100 million. The venture growth fund, I think, put in approximately $10 million from the venture growth fund into FundGuard, which our early stage fund was sort of tapped out, having put 10, 15 million already into the company, et cetera. So that's kind of the purpose of that vehicle. And it's a bit of a barbell approach where the early stage fund's doing earlier and the venture growth doing a little bit later. But as we continue to think about how do we extend our platform, how do we grow, but we love small and early, and that's what we've done pretty well. And we'd like to keep doing that for the next 20, 30 years, hopefully.
Wow. I think one of the most amazing things is, out of everything so far, I think, it goes almost a full circle. When you talk about luck, at the end of the day, Lord Jacob Rothschild gave you that opportunity. He's like, guys,
100%, amazing.
I'm going to take a chance on you too.
Fantastic, yeah.
And from there, everything is spun out.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have the luck component, and then you have the two values that you mentioned in the beginning that you learned from your father, which is, if you're going to do work, to do the best job possible.
Yeah.
And the other second thing is work hard, but also shame tov, I think.
Yeah, I think it's all those things. It's really this convergence of show up, and work hard. 90% of life is really just showing up and working hard. And surprisingly, many people aren't ready, willing, and able to do that. It takes sacrifice. It's not easy. Again, it meant, Dave and I were getting on flights at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and staying at Motel 6s. And it was a lot. We were a startup. We've definitely evolved somewhat. And Shem Tov and Tikkun Olam have been, really our name, our reputation, our brand is really important. And then, listen, at the end of the day, nothing helps breed success more than success. So we've been really fortunate to meet and invest in some of the best entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and Israel over the past 25 plus years. And success can, hopefully, and usually does, breed success. We've grown out our team with really smart, talented people that are amazing. And we have entrepreneurs that come back to us that are serial entrepreneurs. They're like artists. They want to keep on painting. It's rare that an artist is going to paint one painting and then go home and retire. And so many entrepreneurs come back. They send us their friends. So on a certain level, our job has gotten easier because it's sort of rinse, wash, repeat. I feel like we've been there, done that. It's still really hard to perform, as an early stage fund and take a $100 million fund and turn it into 3, 4, 500 million or more. That's really hard to do. I mean, our early fund 2 has returned 11x.
Wow.
And been fantastic, performance. Our pledge fund was a 9x. So again, all of our funds have to date been in the top quartile or decile. Some are still earlier, and we need to get there. They're not there yet, but I'm very optimistic that we'll continue to land in that top quartile or decile. I'm very proud of the fact that none of our funds have ever lost money, even funds that have been through very difficult economic cycles where other funds have lost their money. We've been, again, very fortunate, and none of our funds have ever lost money. We've always returned every dollar to our investors plus. And to me, that's something I'm very proud of. And it's listen, I feel really, like I said, very lucky that I have some, like my day job is very intellectually stimulating and challenging. David and I have literally traveled the world together over the past 25 years, working with different companies, visiting different opportunities, meeting with different LPs. Our investors are really just incredible. I mean, we mentioned a few of the names, and they are business builders. They are themselves entrepreneurs and families that have made the world a better place and done amazing things on so many levels. And I mean, I remember we'd have breakfast with Bob Tisch. I mean, he's just so modest. And here we're having breakfast in the Regency Hotel on 61st and Park. It's his hotel. He owns the hotel. We're eating breakfast, and they own the New York Giants. He's wearing his New York Giants watch. It's like a $35 watch. And all he wants to do is talk about like how Phil Simms played in the game, the day, and this is going back. Unfortunately, he's passed as well. But, he was just so lovely and humble and modest. And you like, when you meet and interact with people like that, and you see that with so many of the families that we've interacted with, it really informs your life. And I mean, whatever I've done is like a tiny little fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what some of these families have done on so many levels. So it's very easy to be humble when you interact with so many truly amazing people that have done so much to make the world a better place. And to me, it's just inspiring and an honor to get to spend time with some of these folks and learn what they've done and hear from them and learn from them and try to even do a fraction of what they've done over my lifetime is just amazing. And again, I just, wake up every day and, cherish the fact that, I'm still desperately in love with the person I married 30 years ago and consider myself so incredibly, so I'll never forget this. When I was in high school, I talked to my rabbi, and he was like, I was a very close, student of his, and he was an amazing guy. His name was Rabbi Scheinberg, and he was in my senior year of high school. And he was very religious, and I thought for sure, like, he was going to say, he's like, oh, when you're marrying someone, I figured he's going to say, marry someone super religious. But he turns to me and he says two words, Lev Tov. He said, just marry someone who has a good heart. Yeah. And that stuck with me. Full stop. And so, I know that I've married just a lovely, kind human being, and she makes my life better every day, and thank God. So I'm still like the luckiest guy on the planet to be married for almost 30 years. I've got 3 great kids, and they're healthy and beautiful and kind. What else do you need? Wow. The rest is gravy.
What message do you want to give over to other people? You have this megaphone that's able to reach, a billion people, and you're able to give over this message. What is the value of the message you want people to hear?
Well, I don't know if anyone's going to listen to me, but I would say, not to be a broken record, but like when I teach as a professor, it's just I try to tell the students, the world is your oyster. You're, in the young days of your career now, you're just launching your career. You can do anything you want, so shoot for the moon and the stars. Don't settle for anything. Find mentors, learn and grow. And just remember that all that follows you around for the rest of your life is your name, Shem Tov. So just really think about who you are and who you want to be and what you're aspiring to do, and remember that, and everything else will fall into place. Work hard, show up, and there's no replace. There are no shortcuts. Like, people think like, oh, get rich fast. It just, listen, I thought the same thing too, but, doing this now for many decades and, getting older and maybe a little bit wiser, but like, it takes a long time. And you know what? It's that much sweeter when you've worked hard and achieved it. If you, had something overnight. It's funny, a friend of mine tells me the story of, they worked hard, like they wanted their parents to buy them, I don't know, some outfit or something like that. And their parents said no. And so they got a job and like worked really, really hard and paid for that outfit and bought it themselves. And that was all they cared about. All the other stuff that they got, it was sort of meaningless. So it's like, it just makes it so much more meaningful. Like, and and there's an element of pride you can have that you work hard and you show up and you do good things, and it's sort of like this cycle of and good things will happen.
Right.
So
I love it. Wow. Wow, Bruce, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Abraham.
This has been absolutely amazing. I've learned a tremendous amount. I appreciate you sharing your story about being vulnerable, and sure, there's so much more to learn. There's so much. I have many more questions, but which I'm sure we can get into. But I really, really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it as well.
Welcome.
It's great to chat and have an in-depth session with you.
Thank you.